Hello, everybody. Welcome to today. I'm just going to do a little bit of onboarding before I explain myself and what we're going to be doing here today. So yeah, welcome. For those of you who are looking to use the captioning, please use the CC button below for embedded captions, or use the link in the chat, which I know some of my colleagues will be adding in there as well for captions on a separate screen. Huge thanks as well to our captioner, Claire Hill. We'll also be posting a captioned recording from today's webinar to the Spaces YouTube channel. So do look out for that later on too. Our Bsl interpreter today is Rachel Jones. Thank you, Rachel. If you would like multi-pin enabled, again, please let us know in the chat, or equally any other technical questions that we've got, and my colleagues will be answering those there. Speakers are going to be asked to provide a brief one-line description of themselves and any visual content that they might be sharing. And in terms of any questions that you've got, again, we'll be taking the opportunity to ask questions to the speakers throughout the day, as well as at the end of the session, where we'll do a round table discussion. Please do keep your cameras and mics off until those Q&A portions. And equally, please pop any questions that you've got into the chat too. Let us know if you'd like to ask your question verbally, and we will invite you to take the mic. Otherwise, I'll put the questions to speakers on your behalf. As I mentioned before, we will be recording the session. So if you are going to speak verbally, please be aware you will be picked up on that recording. If you are signing, please feel free to put your camera on. And if you don't use your microphone, you won't be captured in the recording. I hope that's all clear. As I say again, please do use the chat for any technical queries you've got or any questions that you'd like to put to the speakers. So moving on to the myself and my fellow speakers, I'll say hello everyone. Welcome here today. My name is Rob Lindsay and I'm head of programs for the space. I'm a man in my early 40s. I'm white with dark curly hair and a grey jumper, speaking to you from my home in my by now very familiar box room office setup. For those who don't know, the Space is a support agency helping the UK arts and cultural sector make great art and reach new audiences using digital media and content and platforms. We provide commissioning support for arts and cultural organisations and the artists they work with, plus training events, online resources, and instances like today, which I'll explain the schedule for today as well. We've got a slide for this as well that we can put up on screen too. So, as I say, there's a little bit of onboarding here. Then we will be joined by Richard Misek and Adrian Urbina, who are going to be introducing the research that forms the focal point for today, AHRC research, which I will let them explain. But ultimately, we're looking at the subject of accessibility, digital accessibility to the arts. Following that introduction, we'll be hearing from professionals and practitioners speaking about their own, giving their own responses to this as well. So at 10:30, we'll be joined by Jamie Hale, founder and artistic director of Cryptic Arts, for a conversation about his own experiences and his own practice. At 10:50, we'll then enjoy a screen break, and then we'll come back and hear a case study from the team from the Mystery Trip, who again will explain their experiences of making accessible first art. We'll then be joined by Ashman, managing director at Substract, who will be talking about digital accessibility, before we then have a roundtable Q&A with all of the speakers for the final half hour, 25 minutes of the day, before we then close at noon. So that's the structure of today. But as I say, all of this is in response to a fantastic piece of research which is currently being completed. So I would like to hand over to Richard Misek, who has led this research, to introduce himself, plus his fellow guest, Adrian Urbina, as well as some of the themes which each of our speakers will be responding to. Thank you, Richard. If I could please pass the mic to you and ask you both to offer a brief description of yourselves and then tell us about the work you've done. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rob. So I'm Richard Misek. I'm a late 40s male with blonde hair, glasses, and a blurry background. So I'm just going to share my screen. Does that look okay? Yeah.
That does. That looks great, Richard.
Great. Okay, well, thank you very much, Rob. I'm just going to start with a quotation, throw it out as a starting point and as an aspiration, where we are now and where we, I think, wish to get. So for too long, accessibility has been seen as an add-on, a hoop to jump through, rather than as an integral part of a venue's ethos and approach to customer engagement. Providing access should be second nature. Melanie Sharp, CEO of Stage Text. So I'm just going to begin by introducing the project from which this particular webinar emerges. The project is called Digital Access to Arts and Culture. It's an AHRC funded research project that has run for the last year in collaboration with the good people at The Space, who are now my good friends, and Arts Council England. And I'm very briefly going to introduce a little bit of what we've done, what we're going to be doing over the next 2 months or so, our final outcomes, and then hand over to my co-investigator, Adrian, who will go into a little bit of more detail about some of our research findings. And then I'll finish with a couple of suggestions for themes that could perhaps be taken up later in the webinar. Basically, the project has involved a mixed modality of methods, some qualitative, some quantitative. Over the course of the last year, we've interviewed staff at about 40 arts organizations, typically digital managers, marketing managers, and or artistic directors. And then we followed on our interviews with surveys about the digital activities of these organizations. Typically, these have been, well, I think about 60% of these have been performing arts organizations. Probably about 20% have been galleries and museums, and about 20% combined arts organizations. So there's been a little bit of a skew towards performing arts, but we've tried to be as wide-ranging as possible across multiple sectors. Then another key element of the project has been doing a deep dive into the various Indigo surveys that have taken place over the last 2 years or so, in particular the Culture Restart surveys, which ran in 2020 and 2021, and the Digital Experience survey that ran in 2021. Where we've also been conducting a small number of more in-depth case studies. These have, by a mix of chance and design, focused on organizations including Opera North, Serpentine Galleries, Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, Tank Museum, Battersea Arts Centre, Darkfield Radio, and Mystery Trip, which will be the people behind which we'll be meeting later, which is a Lowry Live Now digital commission. And these case studies have included a mix of interviews, audience surveys, as well as some embedding of ourselves within production processes and following them through their various stages. So there's just one one of our case studies from Opera North. My God, that looks so last year now, doesn't it? Funny how things change so quickly. Our project outcomes over the last several months, we've been engaged in writing articles, engaging with the media, and conducting policy work. And now in these next 2 months, we're going to be entering the final outcomes phase of a project, which starts with this webinar, and then will lead on to a gradual release of our case studies and related video content, probably starting in a couple of weeks and then continuing every couple of weeks for the next 2 months. And that will conclude at the beginning of May with publication of a final report. Before I hand over to Adrian, I thought I would just sort of make a few observations and set a little bit of context for this. This is just one question which has been sort of overshadowing the project a lot, like what actually is digital access, and what's in a word? And it's sort of an important question, sort of a not important question, but also an important question. The term access is something that everyone interprets differently. It can sometimes be a little bit nebulous. In the project group, we thought about it a lot, and all we can say is what it means to us. And I think among the things that it means to us are firstly accessibility as it's conventionally understood. So exploring how to overcome exclusions of people with protected characteristics. But also an additional and particular interest has been exploring how to overcome or how digital has overcome exclusions due to a range of previously unrecognized barriers to engagement with art, things which perhaps might have been invisible pre-pandemic. So I'm thinking here about things like having long-term illness, about not living in a metropolitan cultural hub, or maybe about living in a metropolitan cultural hub, but not having a car or not being able to rely on public transport, about other much more open-ended things like being a night worker, being a carer, being a parent with young or not so young children, maybe finding traditional arts venues intimidating, or not even having arts on your radar. And accessibility is a key element in all of these things too. And one very interesting finding, which I read in Arts Professional a while back, and I've lost the reference, and I apologize for not having it, is that about 20% of audiences about 20% of audiences who do not have specific accessibility needs still watch captions in digital arts programs. And this relates to something which I also heard, that the idea that accessibility sort of has a trickle-on effect. So even as well as benefiting people with protected characteristics, it can have all sorts of extensive and intangible benefits beyond that. And I think, I'm going to stop babbling about this and just talk about specifics soon. But I think for us, what digital access, I suppose, ultimately means is just anti-exclusion, about trying to identify ways in which digital can address exclusions previously visible, previously not visible, and improve on that. That is, that's in the wrong place. I'll just jump. No. Okay, sorry, I'm jumping forward there. So I'm just going to introduce a couple of general top-level findings before handing on to Adrian, my co-investigator. Each of these will be addressed in more detail in our final report, so I'm just glossing over them. Some of them are based entirely on our own research, some of them are based on gathering research that we've carried out and other research groups have carried out, for example, the Centre for Cultural Value in Leeds. So one general finding is that the pivot to online arts programming over the last 2 years has achieved very clear, immediate, sustained, and quantifiable access benefits. In particular, online audiences have been more geographically spread than in-person audiences, and online has led to widespread benefits for deaf and disabled audiences. Secondly, the online pivot has achieved these gains without cannibalizing in-person programs. And cannibalization is something which has come up a lot in interviews, where people are anxious that their digital content would somehow discourage people from live attendance. And so far, our research has found this to be a paper tiger. Many are scared of it, but there's really no evidence that it happens at all. In fact, the Indigo Digital Experience Survey suggests that some groups are in fact more likely to attend arts events in person after having experienced them online, rather than the contrary. But putting content online does not intrinsically widen or diversify access to arts and culture. There we go. So this was a real eye-opener. The annual Vocalize Theatre Access Survey noted that for around half of respondents, 47%, over half of the online theatre that they came across was inaccessible to them. Similarly, online has so far not significantly diversified audiences. We have found in the Indigo data some evidence of some small positive shifts around socioeconomic and ethnic diversity, but nothing groundbreaking. Penultimately, there is still a significant disparity between the accessibility of different organizations' digital offerings. Some organizations have incorporated best practices at every stage of their user experience, but many more have approached digital accessibility in a piecemeal fashion. And finally, smaller organizations in particular are struggling with have struggled with delivering digital content, and now as we return to in-person programming are much more likely than larger organizations to be reducing the digital offering. And the snapback to in-person programming is particularly pronounced among small to mid-sized, less well-resourced arts organizations. So with those generalizations, I'll now hand over to Adrian to kind of put a little bit of flesh onto our findings. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Richard. Let me just share my screen, and while I do it, I'll introduce myself. My name is Adrian Degina. I'm a male on my late 30s. I have blonde hair, long beard, and wear big glasses, and I'm wearing a burgundy jumper. And for some reason, I can't find. There we go. Okay, I wasn't sure about what else to say about myself, but just to be able to see my slides now. Well, first of all, I have to apologize in advance because I'll need to leave soon because of teaching commitments. Yeah, but I really look forward to the discussions that will take place after Richard's and well my introduction to the project. Well, as Richard mentioned, what I will be doing here is to highlight some of those points that Richard already made. So this is presenting our take on the story, or at least part of the story of digital access to arts and culture during the last 2 years in the context of the pandemic. So to do so, we access data provided by Indigo, collected our own data, qualitative and quantitative at audience and organizational level. So these multiple sets will provide a great granularity that can help us understand what has happened during the last last 2 years, well, in the context of the pandemic, the lessons that we can learn, and give us the possibility to reflect about the future for online provisions in the arts and culture. Yeah. So as you might also expect, perhaps this story it's clear. But yeah, we believe that the lessons that we can learn are, well, quite valuable. So I have loads of, well, not loads, but yeah, I have graphs and numbers, but I will try not to talk about numbers, but more about what's the meaning behind some of the key trends and patterns that we have find. Mostly from a quantitative perspective, which is my expertise. So, well, first of all, I'm sure that we have all experienced screen fatigue after lockdowns, especially around all the uncertainties and challenges that we face during the peaks of the pandemic. So naturally, this translated into reduced interest in future participation online. However, we need to notice that, and well, we know because of part of because of work on a project, that interest for online, while an alternative for some, for traditionally excluded audiences, can be, and it has been, the only way to participate in the arts and culture. So that's what makes so worrying. That when doing some digging on theaters, we found that there is a dramatic decline in online programming, which is particularly marked for small companies and venues. And this is something that Richard has been writing for the past few months, and that will of course feature also on our final report and other outcomes. So although from a different sector, so from the point of view of orchestras, and here in particular, one of our case studies, so Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, it's a great example to understand the potential of digital access to improve, well, accessibility for remote audiences. So for example, we have estimated using data collected in last October, that the average physical distance traveled by live audiences, it's roughly 11 miles, while the average virtual distance, whatever we can understand as virtual distance, traveled by online audiences is 48 miles. And in fact, well, to that we can add all the potential that online offers to access international audiences to access. So as well as, well, other benefits, of course, as Richard already mentioned, are seen, well, for audiences with difficulties to access venues, which is something particularly relevant for BSO and their successful online strategy. So cultural organizations, at least those that are taking part of our project, are well aware of these potentials, and have set accessibility, widening abroad in audiences, as their top priority. So I'm aware that this is a very, very small purposeful sample. Well, in fact, they roughly 16 organizations have answered our post-interview survey. But nonetheless, we believe that highlights what's the great part of the potential of a strategy for digital access. Yeah. So, however, they're also aware about the obstacles that are faced in terms of when developing digital activities, where we find, for example, challenges of well, generating profit, general issues of monetizing, funding, as well as rights for digital content, and the well, focus, physically focused that organizations already have in place are part of the main barriers. So finally, we have calculated a digital quality index using data from Indigo, and found some differences across groups, particularly in terms of age groups, in which older audiences seem to have well, lower quality of digital experiences in comparison to younger audiences. But perhaps more interesting than that, it has been for us to try to understand to what extent online experience quality can predict, or it can change intentions for future attendance in person, which is, well, of course, part of some of the arguments around the substitution effect of online strategies, which is something that it has been concerned. So indeed, our statistical analysis shows that high quality of digital experiences is highly associated with increasing changes for in-person attendance. So a positive change. So especially, as I was saying before, especially among young audiences. However, average or lower quality of digital experiences that are found across ethnic minorities and those with reduced income are an important challenge for accessibility and inclusion. So this, we argue, it translates or reproduces structural inequalities in access to arts and culture that which we're already aware of. And this is where we believe that digital access has the greatest potential for positive impact and change. So, well, I think that we have a number of potential areas to explore and to continue discussing. So, thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you to Richard as well. Yeah, it's really interesting to see the different areas that this research has been able to cover as well. I know that Richard, you're going to be staying on throughout. You're going to be joining us for the roundtable at the end of the day. But I know that Adrian, I know that you've got to head off because you're teaching at 11 o'clock. So just before we move on to the next speaker, I wondered if, Adrian, if I could just ask you a question, because I know a point you've raised before, I think in response to there was a news article about some of the research early on, and you picked up on something which I think was a really interesting and important point to make. You had said that, I'll try and get this right, you said that done right, digital access has potential to broaden and diversify audiences, but long-term strategies and sustainable business models are key, which I think was a really interesting point to make. I wondered if I could ask you briefly to expand upon that. I'm conscious it was a very succinct point, but if I can ask you to expand upon that a little bit, if you had any further thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yes. So, well, something that we should be aware, and I think that this is part of probably my own professional bias, is that I'm always worried about the way how digitization, broadly speaking, has the risk of reproducing inequalities that that are already present in the physical world. And I think that in general in the arts and culture is something that I have seen a number of times in from different in different areas. So as diverse as, for example, libraries, museums, galleries, of course, performing arts, which is closer to the focus of this project. So without being an expert on this, I believe that it's important to consider the way how audiences engage in the digital sphere, what they would like to see, the sort of digital tools that they're using. It's very different to engage with cultural organizations using perhaps tools that are more traditionally associated with marketing, such as social media, instead of in-house platforms or other ways of doing it. And at the core of all that, it's of course it's part of a digital economy. It's part of a financial model that cultural organizations should be aware. That any investment should not just be to put something out, but rather they should integrate audiences as well.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Adrian. I really appreciate you joining us today. I'm going to say a great big thank you as well, because I know that you won't be here at the end when we do thanks and wraps up.
Yeah. Thank you, Rob. Yes.
For joining us. Thank you. That's great. All right. I'm going to move ahead to our next speaker, and again say thank you to Richard, who I know will be joining us for the roundtable at the end. So we'll move straight ahead to our next speaker. I'm going to introduce Jamie Hale, who has joined us very, very kindly to talk about his own professional practice. Jamie, if I could pass the microphone to you to introduce yourselves and offer a short description. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Jamie. I'm white, I'm 30. I've got dark red hair and beard, big black glasses, a headset on my head, a kind of blurred background, and a blue sort of marble print polo shirt that you can see the very top of, because you can only see my head and shoulders. So I'm here in my role as artistic director of Cryptic Arts, which is an organization focused both on offering development and growth opportunities to deaf and disabled creatives, but also working to make the arts industry more accessible through carrying out research and campaigning projects and trying to understand where the access barriers are that affect people most and how we can change them. So I've got some background in creating art which is as accessible as I could manage, and I suppose I say that because I don't think it's possible to create something and say, well, this is now fully accessible. All you can do is sort of work to avoid as many access barriers as possible and be willing to kind of keep growing and changing with your work.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I've got some questions here that I wonder if I could put to you, some talking points. I would say as well, just to repeat to everyone in attendance, if you have any questions or if there's any questions you'd like to put forward yourself, do pop them in the chat. If we're not able to get onto them within each section, we will obviously return to them in the round table at the end. And that might be simply to expand on a particular point or to hear more about a particular topic that does get discussed earlier on. But I suppose looking now, Jamie, if I were to say, I suppose speaking as an artist, what do you see the creative possibilities around access being for the industry, for the sector?
I think one of the problems almost is that we haven't seen access as a creative possibility. We've seen it as an administrative one, as a checklist. And I think that's also partly because audiences aren't necessarily seen as partners in a work. And so providing access, rather than becoming a creative engagement of wider groups of people, instead becomes, how do we let these audiences passively experience our work? And I mean, there are many ways in which I think digital access has a huge number of creative possibilities. And part of that is in the diversification of audiences, as well as the mistake of seeing it as kind of an administrative issue. I think there's also a mistake in terms of seeing it as, digital access provisions make it easier for deaf and disabled people to experience the work. And I would say there that it's about making it possible as well as making it easier, but that ignores enormous populations who will benefit massively from these provisions. And I think a sort of failure of advertising them has led to a misunderstanding of their creative role. If we're removing geographic barriers, my solo show was able to travel in the middle of the pandemic to Jakarta without me, and there was an entire audience in Jakarta watching a piece that I had done in the UK context. And that removal of geographic barriers, the possibility of removing temporal barriers, just in terms of the time commitment to attend an event, or the ability to watch it later, allows for a wide range of kind of alternative audiences to engage, and allows for physical audiences to also engage digitally if they want, because it is fundamentally a very different experience watching something on your computer or TV than watching it in person. But that doesn't mean it's lesser, and can mean it's greater. Yeah, I can watch a show on my computer and at the same time be typing up all of the notes that's inspired in me about my own work. And I've not got my laptop out in the middle of a theatre, which obviously would not be kind of acceptable. So I think it's these alternative ways of kind of engaging with the work. And I guess in my own work, I'm really keen to make sure that access provisions are in place that both meet the tick box contents and also go beyond that. So I will always try and have interpreters, captions, audio description, either integrated within the script in which the speaker describes enough that you don't need an external audio describer, or using an external audio describer. I'm currently working on a piece where, rather than having a Bsl interpreter, there will be a deaf performer performing the same piece as me at the same time. So I think there's something there about saying, how can we turn this theoretical access provision into an opportunity for creative growth that will maybe give audiences who are signers a far broader, better and more exciting experience of the piece, because they're experiencing it as acted and performed rather than as interpreted. And then I think there's also something about legacy versions, that if you're using digital access provisions, then recording it doesn't add significant extra work, captioning it a bit of extra work, and then you've got a legacy version of the work for any other opportunity that comes up. So for me, that's a crucial access provision, because I land in hospital reasonably frequently, and I need to make sure when someone books me that I can say, well, if I'm in hospital, my show can come without me. So I think it's also about, what are the things that we additionally get when we're including digital access.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask a sort of follow-up question really here as well, because obviously looking at what people need to consider when offering digital access for deaf and disabled audiences. And there's one in particular here I know that we've talked about before as well, in terms of the route to accessing the work. If it's clear, if it's easy to understand. I know that lots of people have been, as this research indicates, over the past couple of years, doing more and more and more with digital access opportunities, but it does still feel a little bit like there isn't maybe a best practice around accessing the work. Can I ask you to talk a little bit about your thoughts on that topic in particular?
Sure. I think one of the reasons that we're in a place where there isn't a kind of best practice is because of the kind of the cost of digital access, and the fact that it's a lot cheaper to set up a laptop with a webcam streaming to Zoom than it is to be using the multicam setups and lots of frames and angles, and the program they have at the Young Vic where you can change seat in the theatre as you're watching to get a different kind of visual experience from your computer. So I think we end up in a situation where, much as with theatre, a kind of scratch box night is going to be very different from a fully blown performance. But I do think that we need to be thinking about the kind of very basic access provisions around kind of audio description, captions, and interpreters. And a lot of shows won't provide that for a full run, But by providing that for the digital event, then it adds a kind of second possibility for people who can't attend the 1 or 2 nights on the run where these provisions are in place. And from the disability arts perspective, I would like to see them in place every night for a show. But I recognise that that isn't where theatres are at yet. And I think that there's a risk that theatres say, oh, you know, we're making our work accessible because it's online. And that makes it a lot more accessible for a lot of people, but it isn't inherently more accessible. If you, as I need to, lip read, you're not necessarily going to be able to get that connection in a digital version where you could in person. You're not going to necessarily get the impact on issues like social isolation if you're just watching a show. So I think we need to be sure that digital doesn't become a kind of assumption for accessibility, and especially that it doesn't become an excuse for inaccessibility, with events saying, well, you know, we've booked a theatre that doesn't have wheelchair access, but there's an online event, where the question is, why have you not booked an accessible theatre? And where a digital event isn't an acceptable substitute for physical access, in the same way that having physical access isn't an acceptable substitute for a digital event. But I think we need to be thinking about digital as a crucial part of budgeting and planning an event, rather than as a nice add-on. And I think part of that is also understanding the audience journey. If you're restricted to your home, you're not necessarily going to be browsing the Globe website to see what shows they've got on to discover that there's something digital, because you don't know that they would ever do it. So it's about making sure that we are finding ways of advertising this work that actually reach people. And some of that can be done effectively through things like social media, but we also need to be looking at how we can really demonstrate what we're doing with a very clear route to booking tickets and attending. A lot of work is put in, especially by big organizations, for the user journey through the website to get people to book their tickets successfully. And there needs to be something similar for digital access. It needs to be clear how you will access the stream, you know, whether you can pause it or not, what you're getting when you book. And I think often, again, these sort of issues of organizational detail are missed out when we're considering how we make digital work accessible. And I guess there, I mean accessible to everyone who is looking for digital work, not just deaf and disabled people. And I, you know, for a long time, I've had in the back of my mind how wonderful it would be for there to be an arts listing website that listed online events specifically and essentially only, where you could see what was on anywhere in the country, maybe anywhere in the world, and book tickets, where again, it wasn't about finding the theatre and hoping they do something digital. It was about, here are the listings for all of the artistic possibilities open to me. And I think if we're not looking at how to put basic access into our work, then there's a real question about whether that work is artistically viable, because I don't necessarily think work that consciously excludes a range of people from experiencing it is not artistic work with equity at its heart, and is not necessarily viable as an artistic project for that reason. And I recognize that there are huge cost implications. Cryptic is currently starting a research project exploring how we can build, I guess, a community of expectations around the access provisions that organizations of various sizes should be putting in place, with the idea that artists and organizations refuse to work with or on events that don't meet those kind of very basic minimum standards. And I think that will do a lot to increase the viability of a lot of art in the industry by really forcing it to focus on access as a part of the project.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jamie. We've got a few minutes left, so I wondered if I could ask you a little bit about, I suppose, some of the practicalities, and I'd invite you, you know, if there are references to your own work that it would be useful to, but to talk, I suppose, specifically about, following on from what Adrian said about, you know, it does need sustainability, it does need a business model. If I could ask you just to talk a little bit about cost implications and I suppose audience uptake as well with accessible work.
I think at this point, a lot of arts organisations understand the cost implications of putting on a show, rehearsal space, theatre, tech, all of these costs, and there is support and information out there to do it. So you're sat there, you're budgeting your show, you've done that, and then someone says, and what about your digital budget? And you grind to a halt because you have absolutely no idea whether your digital budget is buying a webcam or whether you need to involve a production company with multi-camera work. And you've got to kind of come to a conclusion about what you could afford and justify providing in a world where there is very limited information. And there are kind of some challenges here also, because this obviously increased the cost of events and there isn't necessarily extra money available to match that. So I think there's the real implications at the outset are, you know, how do we get that information to people? How do people know what they should be providing, what it should be costing? How do we prevent, I guess, predatory business models capitalizing on uncertainty to say, well, you know, it will cost £10,000, but you've got to do it. But how do we also make sure that people are committing enough resources that digital isn't just a lesser cousin of the show that you're doing because you have to? It's got its own creative approach, its own engagement. You're thinking about how you're working with digital as a format equally to your work with live as a format. You're not producing one piece of work and streaming it. You're thinking, how can I make this work accessible in a digital manner? And there's lack of demand there in terms of ticket sales, that the theoretical demand, I've discovered, massively outweighs the actual number of ticket sales. And I think there's some thoughts around uptake in terms of how we reach out to other audiences, parents, rural audiences, international audiences, and really make the digital not just about accessibility, but also about wider uptake as a marketing tool, which I think would be really beneficial. But I also think fundamentally, for as long as we see the digital project as the subordinate of the performance project, we're not going to get the uptake that we're looking for. And for as long as we see the digital project as specifically an access project for deaf and disabled people, similarly, we're not going to find the audiences that we're hoping for.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Jamie. We've just got a couple of minutes before the screen break, or about 60 seconds before the screen break. So I just wanted to ask for your thoughts on one more thing. I know you've talked there about when looking at that uptake, looking at kind of different communities. I thought it was really interesting what Adrian said earlier on, where he said, you know, their research states that the average drive time for a physical in-person event was 11 miles. For a digital event, it was larger, it was 48 miles. Although that number is larger, on a global internet, it feels comparatively small, given that you know, we could be watching performances in Sydney or California or wherever it may be. I wondered if I could ask you a little bit more about the importance of community in finding audiences for digital work, accessible or otherwise. Really, is that okay? And that might be too woolly a question, so please say if it is.
No, I think I understand it. And I think it's that there are a range of communities which each need their own marketing strategy. And again, it's not really enough to do, as I will admit Cryptic did, and say, oh, you know, we've got this digital provision, you should come. It's about looking at what different communities who would value digital provision might be looking for, and how we can target the digital provision to them. And again, I think a bit about the concept of a listings website that listed international digital arts work, where people could follow through to the organisation and book tickets. But if you're a parent and you're looking for shows that you can watch late in the evening after a child is in bed, then you're going to have a different set of demands and preferences to somebody who desperately wants to be at a physical theatre, and the next best thing is watching the show live and reacting along with the audience. And I think it's then about saying, well, how do we recognise what people are looking for in a digital show beyond experiencing it? Do we want to host a watch party with post-show discussion? Do we want to increase the time people have to watch the show to a week rather than 2 days? What does this group need? Why would this group be interested? And what we can do to specifically reach out to this group as a kind of model for making sure that we're taking digital access into the broader artistic sphere as a tool for audience development, rather than simply a tool for making accessible work.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Jamie. And yeah, brilliantly eloquent answers throughout as well. I really appreciate that. Fantastic. All right. Well, look, what we're going to do now is I'll say thank you to Jamie, who is going to come back and join us for the roundtable at the end as well. But what I'm going to say is we're going to take a screen break now until 11 o'clock, at which point we're going to come back and hear from the Mystery Trip team, who excitingly launched an Accessible First show this very weekend, only 3 days ago. So we're very lucky to have them here today. And we'll also hear from Ash Man from Substract as well, who is going to talk about digital access, his own experiences of that as well, before that round table. So as I say, we'll take a screen break now and come back at 11 o'clock. I'm going to turn off my screen and microphone here, but I'll turn it back on at 11, and that will be the signal to restart. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Hello, everybody. So we're just going to slowly restart in case anyone's to the kettle or anything like that. But yeah, I think we'll restart now, everybody. So yeah, huge thanks to everyone that we've already heard from. Obviously introducing the research, a lot of really interesting findings and some points that we will undoubtedly return to during the roundtable discussion at the end. And huge thanks as well to Jamie for sharing his own thoughts. Again, a lot of things I've tried to write down, a few of the things that he said there as well that we'll put to the rest of the team for their own thoughts and expanding upon those too. But before we go any further, I would like to introduce our next set of speakers again for a conversation about accessibility in practice as well. We are joined today by the fantastic Mystery Trip team. If I can ask the three of you to turn cameras and microphones on, and to join us here today. We've got a lot of people here today, so I'm just going to move my screen so that I can see everybody. But if I could invite you to introduce yourselves with a brief description. I'm going to pass the microphone first of all to Nigel. If I could ask you to introduce yourselves and then pass the mic to your colleagues for the same, please.
Great, thank you. Hello, I'm Nigel Barrett. I'm a theatre maker and actor. I'm mid-50s, bald head, red face, salt and pepper beard. And I've got a big chunky cardigan on because it's very cold in East London today. And behind me is a painting, a white wall and a painting of Snowdon and a pot plant, which I just realised needs dusting.
Yes.
Fantastic, thank you very much. And I'm going to pass the mic to Louise, if that's right. Hi, Louise.
Hello. Yes, I'm a 55-year-old woman, white woman, and I'm sitting on my settee in my front room.
Fantastic, thank you. And Kerry. Hi, Kerry.
Hello, I'm Kerry. I'm early 40s white lady with pink hair. I'm also sitting in my living room surrounded by plants and all sorts of things. It's quite busy in the background. I'm sorry.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, everyone. So you obviously, as I've said, are the team behind Mystery Trip, but I wonder if I could ask you to talk a bit about what exactly Mystery Trip was and the fact that it was specifically an accessible first piece for you. So if I could ask you to also talk a little bit about the process of developing it.
Shall I do that? And then, guys, I start and then I can hand you. So there's two strands to this. The first strand is that Louise and Kerry and myself all know each other from our belonging to a theatre collective called Shunt, which was started many years ago in the days when you could take over buildings in London and make shows in them before they were turned into luxury flats. And we ran a radical arts bar underneath London Bridge Station while they were waiting to convert it. So we had the free run of the place and it was amazing. And Kerry was our bar manager. So we were a theatre company that ran a bar where we encouraged everyone to make always the work that was to come to be experimental and as radical as it could be. And Kerry ran our bar. That's one strand. Then Louise and I, we make theatre as well as being part of the collective. We work together making theatre. And one of the things that we've always tried to explore is the live event. That theatre is live, not just sitting there, but being part of it, somehow being acknowledged, being recognised, that we're all there together in that moment. We were commissioned by Manchester International Festival to make a show called Party Skills for the End of the World. And that was a show in which we essentially taught the audience all the skills they'd need to have a party at the end of the world. And we did it in an abandoned building in Manchester and in Shoreditch Town Hall. Then when the pandemic happened, we were asked by Manchester International Festival to make a digital version of it because it seemed appropriate. And we did that, and then somehow we had to take this huge show for 500 people a night in these amazing buildings and then sort of make it on the internet and get the audience to wander around the internet with us and meet these experts. So it was a really interesting challenge, but also about keeping it live, because the show is about meeting people, real people who would teach you things, how to make a perfect martini, how to bake a paper flower, how to throw a knife, whatever you need. At which point we did the show, and then we had an email from Kerry, who we hadn't seen for a long time. Kerry?
Yeah, so Nigel invited me to the show. It had been about 10 years since we'd last worked together at Shunt, since it had last finally closed down. 2011, 2012, that happened. And I've always had problems, physical problems with my hips. And it had been a constant problem. I've been managing it with pain relief and this, that, and the other. And in the 10 years since I last saw Nigel and Louise, I've become housebound. I have chronic pain all the time and I'm housebound. And I haven't been to any cultural events. I haven't been to any theatre. I haven't been to any gigs. I haven't been to any drag shows I tried to go to because I just physically couldn't do it. It was physically getting to places and being in places and having somewhere to sit down. So I hadn't even bothered looking, like Jamie said, I hadn't even bothered looking at the listings of what was available. I didn't even know digital theatre was available. So when Nigel and Louise invited me to this, it was brand new and it opened my eyes and my mind, because I'm not a creator. I was like, my last job was a bar manager. And it opened my mind and I was like, wow. And I got to meet new people, like speaking to strangers and things like that, little things that you don't realize you've lost until you've lost them. And it just really blew my mind that something like this was possible. And I knew if anyone was going to do it, it was going to be Nigel and Louise. So then we had the next conversation. And you told me, do you want to go back to it, Nigel? You wanted to make something for, was it for housebound people?
Well, there was a commission from the Lowry called Live Now, which was specifically to explore how hybrid theatre and digital theatre can work now theatres had reopened. And a lot of the conversation we'd had with Kerry was how the whole world had thrown all its resources and its all imagination to create all this work and provide culture for everybody in lockdown and being at home. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh great, now we were at the table together and now everybody's going away and I'm stuck again. And we said, well, let's make a show with the community that you're talking to. I think, is that how it went, guys?
Pretty much, yeah.
Lou, do you want to take on?
Yes, so there was an open call from the Lowry for live digital work. And we approached Kerry and said, look, we've had these conversations with you about party skills and would you like to make something together where we could give her a voice to express how she feels about how everything was opened up. She could get online appointments with her doctor, she could go to cultural events, and then suddenly the doors opened, everybody left, and here she is still at home on her own, as she has been for the last 10 years and will continue to be, having had just a taste of what it could be like if provision was made for people who are confined in the home. As Jamie said, not just because of disabilities or chronic health conditions, but also people who are carers, people who are parents, people who live in the middle of the countryside. And so we sort of decided that we would do a project together, and we designed it together. And the idea is that we would all go on a mystery trip on a digital bus and that we'd all go together. And suddenly the international ability of digital theatre that the team were all over the country. Kerry's in Bath, we're in London, the technical team, a lot of them were in Manchester and Sunderland. We were all able to work together and on the mystery trip. So it's on 3 Saturdays. So we did last Saturday, we're doing this Saturday at 8 in the evening, and then the following Saturday at 2:30 in the afternoon. And this last Saturday, the first trip, we went mudlarking on the Thames with a lady mudlarker. And then we went to New Delhi and were shown around a market. And we went to Tokyo and went to a temple at midnight. So we're able to travel the world on our digital bus. So we're just taking the opportunities that digital work gives you that are unique to digital work, and it is inherently live. But I think the important thing for us was, if we were going to make a show with and for people who are confined to their homes, that it need to be as accessible as we could possibly make it. So we incorporated a performer who has British Sign Language and made her another one of the tour guides on the bus. We have somebody who's a creative writer to do the audio description, and we had a payment typist doing live captions. So, and we also worked with some people who are confined to home with autism, and made sure that we made it as accessible for people with autism as well. I mean, that was a big learning lesson for us, because obviously we're all we were having meetings with anybody who wanted to come along to be involved in the process. And I'm not used to having to mute all the time so that you just hear one voice. It's very easy to get used to, and it's something you sort of just take for granted, that everyone's just chattering away on Zoom. But actually, that's something that I've learned that's a really good tool for everybody, not just for people with autism, but to try and just keep one voice at a time on Zoom. It makes it much less exhausting in the process.
Fantastic, really fantastic. Thanks, everybody. And you've started to answer my next question, which was going to be exactly that, kind of what did you yourselves learn from the process? And I suppose connected to that, how it pushed you creatively. Can I open that to all three of you, please?
Well, I've never done this before, so I learned everything about the show, right from the beginning, right to performing. So I learned everything. So I didn't have any bad habits to break, and I didn't have any preconceptions. So that was pretty cool, and it was quite useful for Nigel and Louise. But it was really nice that, like, right from the get-go, it was digital and it was online, and we were all online. My needs were taken care of straight away, because you can do it anywhere. That was brilliant for me. So I learned everything. Nigel and Louise probably learned some more.
Yeah, I think my idea of what access would be, I've learned a lot about that, because working with people who've got chronic health conditions and pain and fatigue, it's a very different process. That, I mean, there is something inherently incompatible about working with people who have chronic fatigue and the normal theatre tech week. And I think we pushed Kerry beyond her limits at some points, I think. And that's, for the future, a very definite lesson.
Sorry, talking over, I also got to learn my limits. Because I've not worked for the past 10 years, I haven't known what my limits are. And now I do know. Now I know where the boundaries are and where to put them in. So I've still learned something from it.
Yes, but also in terms of access, I think we imagined that access workers would physically help people, which is, Kerry's had an access worker in order to help her move things around, but also having an access worker to do the things. If you only have so much capacity within a day before you get exhausted, then if we provide an access worker to do things like the shopping, or we get ready meals, or we have someone to do cleaning or pick up children, then that gives that person the capacity to then work with us. It's, you know, it's a trade-off. And I think that was a really interesting thing that we learned about what it is that we need to provide for people in order for them to be able to be part of the process. And I think, Nigel, they're working with a British Sign Language interpreter as a performer. I think the idea that you would perform, Nigel, and then in the corner someone would afterwards sort of interpret what you are saying. What we've realized is that it's a really beautiful thing to watch, and so performing with that person and allowing space so that all of the audience, not just people who are British Sign Language users, but all of the audience get to enjoy the beauty of that. So you'll hear something as a hearing person, but you'll also then get the opportunity to watch the person and have space around that. So you already know what that is, and then you watch it being played out. That's been a really nice thing to discover. And
also that we share equal boxes. It's not sort of someone signing in the corner for us. It's like it's me and another performer working together in a way that performer's integrated into the show rather than being put on the side of the stage where, you know, in the standard model. So that's really great, because we're theatre devisers and we play and make and create. So it's just having another creative on stage rather than having, something just to translate.
Yeah, fantastic, really fantastic. And you're starting to answer this as well. I really like when my next question is already being touched upon. This is fantastic. I was going to ask about the kind of like logistical implications, the kind of resource implications there. You've already started talking about, you know, different ways in which you learned that could be deployed. Can I ask you to expand a bit on that specifically, the logistics and the resources that were needed?
Lou, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, well, I think we're very fortunate in that we managed to get some match funding from the Arts Council through Grants for the Arts, and they have a specific allocation for access on top of the show costs, and so we were able to provide access to people who wanted to participate through that fund, which is a great resource that was provided by the Arts Council. And I think it's great that it is on top of your costs and that you aren't sort of punished. It's not punitive against your resources to try and provide access. So I think that we're very lucky in this country that that's available.
And I think the logistic, I mean, I'm not sure if this would mean, but like every time we make something online, it seems that the thing we want to exist to make the show doesn't exist. So we have to, whenever we talk to the technicians, go, how can we do this thing where we move people around and it's all fun and live? And they say it doesn't, well, we're going to have to make it. And and the thing is, that's a huge, massive, expensive job to make this amazing holodeck programmable system that we want. So we spend a lot of time infuriating people to try and get them to hack different things to make our shows work, which they love secretly, hacking the tech. But I think it's, maybe there's a lovely sort of loveliness to our naivety where we just go, let's do this, and not realizing that actually it's much harder than we imagine.
There's an enormous amount of programming and coding going on in the background where we're going, oh, that looks nice. Can we try a different way? And everyone's because we're quite analog ourselves. Yeah, so we've been working with the Zoom. So the show uses Zoom and the immediacy of that with spotlighting. And then whenever we want to do any effects or show the gallery or do close-ups or show film, that we actually have a capture through Zoom, ISO and OSC. We capture the gallery view, and then we can integrate it and put it in, and then we can spotlight that. So that's how the show sort of works.
And I think it's because, because we come from a devising world where everybody's equal in the room, and it's like, right, what have you got? Show us your tricks. Have you got any magic? What shall we do? With the lighting and the sound and designers, and everybody's just trying to make these things. Then the technicians that we're working with, you just apply that same ethos to and say, right, creatively, can you solve this? How do we do this? What can the tech do that you've not thought about? What is this loveliness we can get from this tech? So that is really exciting, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. And I suppose my final question would be, I suppose, how, and again, we started to touch upon this as well, how would you hope that hybrid theatre like this would continue to develop?
I mean, we love it. We love it because it's just so full of possibility and opportunity, and also to suddenly making a show and there's somebody watching in Jakarta and there's somebody watching in Canada and New York at different times of the night, and it's really great for us to be able to sort of bring work to audiences all over the world. I think that's very exciting. And
to be able to work with collaborators that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So we wouldn't have been able to work with Kerry if we hadn't worked online. And a lot of the other collaborators, that they're all over the country, and bringing everybody to one place and putting everyone up in accommodation and all of the transport costs and all of that often make it impossible to work with such a big team who are spread all over the country. So that's.
I suppose, Kerry, you should have the last word, really, because this project was sort of formed from our conversations and that.
Just opened a whole world that wouldn't have been accessible, which hasn't been accessible to me the last 10 years. Excuse me. It's reintroduced live performance to my life. That's basically the last word. Reintroduced it. I got to take part in it, which I wouldn't have been able to before.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Nigel, Louise and Kerry. And yeah, if you're able to stay on and join us for the roundtable discussion, that would be really, really fantastic.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you so much. Thanks for inviting us.
Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. All right, we're going to move on to our final speaker of the day before the round table. I'm going to say as well, we're going to have a short additional screen gap as well immediately before that round table, just for a short break, because just before we push through to that final end. But before we do that, I would like to pass the microphone to Ash Mann from Substract. We're very lucky to have you here as well. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. If I could please pass the microphone to you to offer a short description of yourself and then hear what you have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Rob. Of course. Hello, everyone. My name's Ash, as Rob said. I'm a man in his now late 30s. I'm mixed race, short black hair, slight stubble because I need a shave, and I'm sat in an apartment in Paris. I am wearing a beige knitted jumper, and as Rob said, I'm the managing director of a digital agency called Substract. We work exclusively with cultural organizations, both in Europe and in North America. We have ongoing relationships with about 65 organizations now, ranging from organizations such as Little Angel Theatre who are puppetry theatre in Islington, all the way up to, you know, the American Rep at Harvard in the States. We work with Malmö Opera over in Sweden. We work with the National Theatre in Sadlerswells in London as well. And we work with the Lowry. I just saw a link to the Lowry's website to go into the chat. So that was nice to see. And it's been so interesting to listen to everything that's been discussed so far today. I think what's been interesting from my perspective as someone who's been evangelizing about the potential of digital, particularly for the cultural sector for the past 15 years, is that it doesn't feel like I need to explain to people why it might or could be important after the past 2 years. That the pandemic's done quite a good job of making that case. But certainly there is still much to be done. And actually, before I sort of get stuck into my prepared notes, they're reflecting on a couple of things that Richard said about the positive trickle-down effect of things that might traditionally be seen as access things, such as captioning. So, for example, on Facebook, it has been reported that about 85% of videos are watched on mute. So obviously captioning has a huge benefit for all viewers of that content. Both Facebook and YouTube data indicates that including captions in your video content increases the watch time of that content. So people are going to watch more of your content if you're making it accessible. And also captioning video has a search engine optimization benefit. By including caption information, you're including additional metadata for search engines to index and subsequently assign a higher relevance to your content potentially. So, you know, I could talk about that much more, but access considerations are going to be benefiting your organization and your audiences in many more ways than just the obvious ones. And I really believe that in a digital context, accessibility and usability are inextricably linked in a way that is perhaps less obvious in a physical context. If you make something more accessible, particularly in a digital context, you are making it more usable, and therefore it will be more successful for your business, for your audiences. And as both Jamie and Richard have said, making something more accessible will have other unexpected benefits beyond the obvious or intended impact just on audiences who have specific needs. And I want to talk about a couple of things that come out of the work we do at Substract, but I think that are relevant to this discussion, because it feels like whilst there has been so much experimentation and learning and success that has come out of the digital work over the past couple of years, there have also been some really obvious gaps and shortcomings. And I think perhaps most obviously they have been around accessibility. And I'm really interested in how we as a sector start to try and understand how those gaps might be overcome. And I think there are two areas of design thinking and process that might be helpful as a starting point for solutions. So firstly, I want to talk about inclusive design, and secondly, I'll talk about thinking about the whole audience journey or the whole audience experience through a process known as user journey mapping. But inclusive design, what is inclusive design? It is a design approach that is sometimes referred to as universal design. And it posits that designing for the widest range of people and the widest range of needs ultimately creates better design, which in turn benefits more people. And at Substract, we believe that this approach simply means you do better work. It also has the benefit of moving conversations about accessibility and inclusion to be far more central to what you are doing. Because if understanding and meeting a diversity of need and a diversity of experience is your starting point, then it stops being a separate or technical afterthought and instead becomes the primary measure of success. A couple of years ago, I interviewed the very brilliant Robin Christopherson, who is head of inclusion at AbilityNet for a podcast that I host. And he has a really interesting and I think insightful perspective about the world we all currently inhabit, especially when it comes to digital products and services. He describes what we're living in as an age of extreme computing experiences, because such a vast majority of our lives now involve or entirely revolve around computing interactions of one form or another. We're constantly engaging with computers, we all are today, especially through screens, touch screens, tiny screens. We're often on the move. And often while we're doing all this, we're also doing something else at the same time. And these interactions are often complex, they're often information dense, and they're increasingly sophisticated experiences. And we are almost always undertaking them in what might be referred to as suboptimal environments, whether that's trying to read the news while you're standing on a moving bus, holding onto your phone with one hand and holding onto one of those poles to keep your balance with the other, whilst the sun is bouncing off your phone screen. Or trying to work out what your work schedule is for that day on a calendar that you have to access through a rubbish web interface while you're on a busy, noisy train and you keep losing your internet connection. Or simply trying to work out what to watch on television. You're searching through the programs on offer using a remote control whilst the chaos of everyday life bubbles around you. These are all incredibly sophisticated, incredibly complex, and incredibly affected experiences that you're having to endure, none of which are likely to be being undertaken in the ideal conditions that the people who designed those experiences originally envisaged. And in each of the scenarios I've just described, aspects of digital accessibility suddenly become highly relevant. Whether fine motor control is likely to be less possible, low contrast or overly dense screens are going to be completely unreadable, or information and functionality is unlikely to receive the user's full attention. Within all of these contexts, principles of digital accessibility suddenly become tangibly relevant to people who would otherwise perhaps not define themselves as having any specific access requirements at all. And this is why I think, as others have said, it's so important we move away from this perception that we encounter time and again, that accessibility is an add-on or it's a separate set of considerations, particularly in a digital context. We think unless accessibility is woven into the core of your thinking and the core of your approach, you're going to be making ultimately a less good and yes, less accessible experience for so many of your users, whether that's broadcasting a live stream, or simply asking someone to buy a ticket, inviting them to explore a virtual world, or simply asking them to find out when they can visit your venue. Unless you're employing some of these principles of inclusive design, you are likely to be making things more difficult than they need to be, and you will be excluding some people altogether. I don't want to dwell too much on the problems that the sector has with diversity and inclusion, but this whole area of digital working is yet another part of our sector that is less successful than it needs to be because of the historic and very current lack of diversity of people working to design, produce, and deliver these experiences and services. Because you cannot have inclusive design without properly inclusive representative teams. In conversations about digital experiences, I and all of you, I'm sure, often hear the word intuitive thrown around because people love jargon. But what I assume is being said here is that the digital thing, whatever it is, should be easy to use. It shouldn't require a lot of understanding or thought to be able to engage with. But something is only going to feel easy to use or engage with if you have a clear understanding of how, why, where, and when someone will be doing that. And I would suggest that understanding is easiest to achieve when you have a team that can bring a rich diversity of ideas and lived experience to those conversations, allied with a healthy curiosity and desire to fill the gaps in their shared understanding. It was interesting early in the pandemic to hear from the organizations we work with that many of the customer service queries and challenges they were getting about their new digital work were to do with the mechanics of accessing it. Whether that was about buying a ticket, whatever a ticket meant at that time, understanding when or how they could access the art itself, issues with Wi-Fi, issues with casting it from their phone or their laptop to their TV, issues with being able to turn the captions on. The hurdles in getting to the core experience that we all wanted them to have was undoubtedly hampered and impacted how they felt about it. And this was impacting everyone. So I want to talk a little bit about customer journeys. We can call them audience journeys in this context. My colleague, Annette Mees, used to be artistic director of an organization called Coney. Coney mixes live and digital art forms to create immersive stories. And they used to say that the show starts when you first hear about it and finishes when you eventually forget about it. And I think this is a really interesting and powerful way to think about how we construct our audience's experience. The show, in a digital context, is not just the live stream or whatever you might be doing. The show started hours, days, or weeks before that for some people. In that context, all the other stuff that was historically the preserve of administrators and wasn't part of the art suddenly becomes much more important, because from this perspective, it becomes part of the artistic experience, because of course it does. No one goes, I've hated the way they talked about the show. It was really difficult to buy a ticket. The journey was horrible. The venue was difficult to get into. They were rude to me when I arrived. But now I'm going to entirely reset my emotional context to experience this art from a neutral starting point. And this is just as true for the digital experiences we are creating. From the moment someone starts to engage with us, we're creating expectations. Are we being clear with how we're talking about the thing, whatever the thing is? Do people know how, when, and where to access it? Is it easy for them to create an account, to part with their money, to do whatever they need to do? And are we making it easy or even possible for people to engage with us about the thing they are or have just experienced? Jamie said earlier, audiences have just been this sort of passive mass that have had culture beamed at them through screens. And I'm not sure that's what all of the cultural sector is looking for in its audience engagement. None of these questions are actually focused on producing the central cultural experience, but they are key to an audience's experience of that thing. And at Substrate, we find that a process called customer journey mapping can be incredibly useful to help understand and subsequently address the full arc of your audience's experience. And I think this can work in a sort of physical, but also digital context, ensuring that you have a clear understanding of what your audiences need and when they need it will deliver much more enjoyable and therefore successful experiences. Sadly, I don't have time to do a step-by-step breakdown of customer journey mapping right now, but I would encourage you to Google it. There are lots of great free examples, templates, and resources, and it can be a really good way to bring different teams, people from different parts of an organization together to talk about the arc of an audience experience. But what does this have to do with accessibility? Users with specific access needs are likely to particularly benefit from this widening of your perspective. If you've been through the full audience journey of someone who needs to know a very particular piece of information, answer a very particular question, or access a specific bit of functionality, then you'll be able to judge whether or not you are actually getting them what they need. And even more than that, you will begin to understand just how early in the process you might be putting them off altogether. For example, if you are offering audio description in the work you're producing, but there is no mention of that anywhere, and no indication of how a user might access that, or specific thought given to the questions and issues someone may have when accessing that part of your offer, then it's almost completely pointless doing it in the first place, or at least you're making it very clear that it wasn't your primary focus. It's the equivalent of having the hearing loop headset in your venue being broken, or your Bsl interpreter being hidden by scenery, or not telling people about your wheelchair spaces, or only publicizing your audio described work and touch tours in your printed brochure. It's insulting and it's self-defeating. Having a clear understanding of how people are arriving at and moving through your digital ecosystem and the information they need along the way is vital. It's not enough to simply be putting our work online in whatever form. We need to put as much effort into ensuring that the way we think about, design, and deliver these experiences, and by that I mean every aspect of these experiences, so that we can reach and benefit everyone. And while of course there are specific technical considerations and skills that are needed to resolve these issues, the primary thing I've been talking about today is mindset and approach. I completely understand that specific external support may be required for the technical aspects of the work that we're all talking about today. But I think that we can and should all take responsibility in our organizations for shifting and evolving our thinking about an approach to projects like these. Because my experience shows me that shifting these things will result in a far better, far more accessible outcome. We've all learned so much over the past 2 years, and I'm excited and hopeful to see those learnings have a ripple effect that will, fingers crossed, impact the digital landscape of the sector for the better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ash. That was fantastic. That was fantastic. Some really, really nicely considered points. Thank you. I enjoyed that a lot. I enjoyed that. There are a lot of things you're describing there that, yeah, they seem completely obvious when you phrase it in that way, which is wonderful to hear. Brilliant. All right. Well, look, what I'm going to do is, Ash, you're okay to stick around for the roundtable discussion as well. It'd be really great to hear your thoughts. I've got a couple of thoughts that I'd like to put to the group as well. But I'm going to suggest, just before we do, we're just going to add in an extra sort of 2 to 3 minute screen break as well, just before we all come back. If anyone has any questions, do pop them in the chat. But don't worry, I've got lots of points and notes from this end as well. So yeah, we'll just take a 3 minute screen break. Get yourself comfortable, and then we'll come back in 3 minutes once I turn my camera and microphone back on. Thanks, everyone. Hello, everybody. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. I just wanted to start by saying a huge thank you to everyone who's spoken today. It's been really, really appreciated. A lot of really fantastic and, again, eloquent, articulate thoughts on this as well. I wanted to start the round table by just inviting all of our speakers back onto the screen again. And I thought it would be interesting actually to start off with a couple of themes that I've noticed from today, and just invite people to expand a little bit as well, because I'm hoping that a lot of the speakers have observed this as well. We do seem to be getting a lot of common threads coming out. There was one that I thought was really interesting. I know, Ash, you had asked the question, are we making it easy or even possible for people to engage with us about the thing that they are or have just experienced? And Nigel, I know that you said as well, very succinctly, theatre is live. it acknowledges the audience. And I just wanted to ask anyone really for thoughts on that idea of liveness, that idea of audience acknowledgement within performances as well, where people had seen digital and opening up accessibility as a way of heightening that or strengthening that, or if that still feels that in the art that we consume, it's maybe still something that's not being accomplished. That's a very kind of open topic, really, just to see if anyone had any thoughts on that idea of audience acknowledgement. Would anyone like to start us off on that?
I'm happy to burble a bit whilst other people's brains think of something cleverer. But I think also in the digital context, it's interesting to think about the very notion of liveness, because obviously in a physically co-present performance, there's the physically co-present thing is what inherently creates the liveness. You know, in a digital context, what is liveness? You know, it's been interesting. It was really interesting to watch, for example, the comments under some of the NT at home stuff when they were on YouTube, and you were seeing audiences from all around the world having a conversation about theatre that had been recorded years previously, edited together and broadcast onto a screen, and the audience were almost breaking the experience because they were trying to talk to each other about it. And someone didn't quite understand what was happening in a Midsummer Night's Dream that I was watching, and there was someone from India explaining to someone in Brazil what was happening and sharing links to other stuff and I just thought that was beautiful and amazing and completely unplanned. And you know, the YouTube comments is not the best way for that sort of interaction to happen, but it was happening there and then. You know, audiences like to engage with the work and with each other, and it feels like so much of the digital culture that's happened it's been broadcast. You know, it's been TV, and less thought seems to have been put around that sort of wraparound and how people want audiences to engage with it and with each other.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Ash. Does anyone else have any thoughts? And if not, I can rephrase it slightly as well, because I suppose there is that aspect of, we're talking here about the things that surround the artwork, that surround the experience as well. Jamie, I know you'd spoken earlier on about places and tools and platforms that allow people to even find the work in the first place, and about how there still seems to be a gap there. And equally, Nigel, I know you talked about wanting to do things with digital, and the people that were advising you from the tech side saying those tools just don't exist at the moment as well. I wonder if either of you would be able to say a little bit about those gaps that you're observing in terms of the tools that enable us to create art and to deliver it to audiences as well. Would either of you be happy to speak on that?
I think Louise will answer that question better for us. Jamie wants to answer first, but I'm gonna hand over to Louise for that. Our answer for that. Is that okay, Lou? You're on mute, obviously.
Muted, Louise. Sorry.
I'm on mute. So, yes, but I think that's part of the exciting thing about it, is that you are, you know, that we're working with coders and technologists and tech people who then will contact somebody in Japan and ask them a question about, oh, I can't do this, and then suddenly I think that what happened, we did a previous show called A Conversation, and we worked with a technologist called Richard Williamson, and he's the stuff that he invented to do our show, because we wanted to pluck people out of the audience and put them on stage with Nigel. So we had lots of screens and projectors, and we were able to project the audience into the space so he could have live conversations with them on the stage as if they were standing up on the stage with him. And Richard's subsequently licensed that with Zoom.
Can I just say, I think what happened was he contacted some guys from a company called Liminal and went, how do I do this? And then they had a really lovely, everybody's had a lovely time trying to solve a problem, and then they've sort of consequently sold that tech to Zoom. So it's, you know, it's
And it's quite exciting. I mean, I was really, really reluctant to do work online because I thought it was going to be the language of film. And I don't understand. I've worked in theatre all my life and I don't understand the language of film. But as soon as we started working with it live, it was very exciting. And it was very clear it was like live theatre in ways that I hadn't expected. And I think the audience also find that really exciting. They think, oh, it's just an online thing. And then when they're in it, it feels like they're in theatre. And when we did a conversation, we broadcast it live from a theatre, it's called Stone Nest in central London, in the basement, which is really beautiful. And we lit it like a theatre, but it had a live element and you could see the audience and you could see the audience reacting through the show. And a lot of people got it was in the first lockdown, a lot of people got very emotional about it because they felt that they'd been in the theatre. So I think trying to make it as much like live theatre as you can is incredibly exciting. And it doesn't feel like a backward step at all to me. It feels like it's taking theatre and adding it to other things that you can't do in the theatre, like suddenly go to China and have a look around that and work with people that you hadn't been able to. There's loads of things that we're able to do on it that that you can't do in theatre, or we might not be able to afford to do in theatre. And access is the thing that's been a revelation to us, that access for any reason is so much better in the digital live theatre world.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Louise. And I can see a comment in the chat from Melissa. Thank you, Melissa, who said, big shout out to Jamie, Shunt and Kerry. As a carer and a person with a recurring health condition, I've looked to digital and interactivity features. I'm hoping that post-COVID, the lessons won't be lost and we can develop and build on understanding and enhancing accessible experience. And Kerry, I can see that you've echoed that as well, saying that is your greatest hope. But that, yes, this webinar has shown me there are people interested in and passionate about it and our experience, which is great to hear, really great to hear. Richard, I wonder if I could come to you.
I'm just busting to say something actually after that. So you don't even need to ask a question. I mean, just returning to the point that you initially made when you were asking Ash. I mean, yeah, it's like I feel this to me feels like a paradigm shift. And the bottom line is about art coming to people and not people having to go to wherever art is. And those, I remember like several years ago, like an old school artist, let's say, who was faced with a question in an audience about why his work was so little available in art galleries. And he said, well, you know, it's a mountain and you've just got to climb it. And it's exactly not, exactly no, it shouldn't be a mountain. Art needs to work harder to come to people wherever they are. And if that situation is in a compromised situation on the bus, on the commute home from work where there's lots of distractions, so be it. If that's at home, so be it. And I think this is part of a kind of a bigger picture of like the Arts Council's Let's Create strategy about moving from broadcast to participation, like Ash said, and also about but I think it's also like a bit of a mind shift, and a lot of arts organizations still have that you come to us attitude in a certain sense. It's like we have the thing that's of value, and actually the value comes from it being in some way a little bit exclusive. And the things, the thing that you will see on a bus or something is inherently of lesser quality because it's easier to access. And my, riposte to that would be just to, make something like, why not just make things as available as they can be in as many ways as they can be? So, live, yes, is great. But then in our research with, one arts organization, we did a survey and found that something like 65% of the audience wanted a live stream, but then 65% also wanted on demand. And so, well, actually, why don't you just deliver both? In different circumstances, for different people, or even for the same people, it can fulfill a need. And I hope that, there's a chance that digital offers many more paths for art to kind of come to people through non-traditional routes. And yeah, so that was my piece. I'll stop now.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Richard. I don't know if anyone else has got any thoughts on that. Jamie, I'm conscious that I've not passed the mic to you yet. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that or what's been said today.
I think it is all coming back to the points made around kind of how we develop the user journeys for different audiences, that people want so many divergent things from digital work, much as I suppose people would want many divergent things from physical work, but they just have to attend what there is. And I think the lesson I'm taking away is about how we start to think about those audiences more broadly and clearly.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Ash, can I ask you to pick up on that? I wonder if you've got, and again, we're going back to that user journey, which I know you'd started to talk about and almost kind of held back a little bit for the sake of time. I'm sure we still don't have time to explore it fully, but if I could just pass back to you if you had any thoughts expanding upon that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I suppose it's perhaps easiest for non-digital people, that people on this call may be having to have conversations with, to talk in terms of buildings. You know, that's the language that people understand. And if you're thinking about, you know, your digital work as a new stage, you know, some organizations call it their digital stage, you would, if you were opening a new building, you would ensure that you would signage up, and you would ensure that, you know, people could get in the front door and they knew how to take their seats, and they knew which way to look and how to experience the thing. And you'd ensure that, you know, it was a comfortable, enjoyable experience. And it feels like, and maybe because we're in this sort of fluid, nascent period, although we're 2 years into it now, so you'd hope some better practices starting to emerge, that people have been so focused on just getting the thing online. Let's just get the culture online somehow, because we're closed and people can't come to our building, that they didn't have time or the understanding to expand the breadth of their perspective beyond that. But I think if we want to exploit the opportunity that's there and reach the audiences that are there, that have proved they're there, and yes, some people will have engaged with digital stuff because they couldn't go in person, but other people will continue to engage with digital stuff or will never go in person. I think we have to think about the full experience. It's not just about, you know, if we're doing a live stream from the moment the performance starts to the moment the screen goes blank. It's about everything leading up to and following on from that, and putting as much care and thought and attention into that experience as we would to the physically co-present experience in venues. I think, you know, as with so many things, it feels like the reluctance to engage with some of that comes down to leadership, and it comes down to leaders not having the, let's be kind, not having the sort of language, the vocabulary to be able to talk about those experiences. And, you know, it's a new thing, so they're coming to it as fresh as anyone else. But it does feel like the physical experience has an overwhelming level of primacy in people's thinking, that if that doesn't shift, as Richard says, the status quo is just going to snap back and crush all of the embryonic progress we've made over the past 2 years. Sorry, I started to clamber onto my soapbox there. I'll step off.
No, that was great. Thank you very much, Ash. Thank you very much. And there's a conversation taking place in the chat as well, with people saying, Melissa saying, I think the biggest challenge of the individual artist and maker is accessing the funding and collaborators, particularly when complicated by own access issues. So was very impressed, yes, to hear about Louise's comment about Kerry's access worker as well. And Richard echoing that as well, saying, yeah, how do we pay for this? How do we put pressure on funders to offer sufficient resources to make it possible? Nigel, I think it was you who talked a little bit about this just as a kind of closing point, because I know it's a very practical point there about that access being available. Was it through the Arts Council? Is that who you said had provided that?
And do you want to take that up? Do you want to answer that with me too? Yes, we did. Yes, we took our standard theatrical manoeuvre. We took our money from the Lowry, from our commission, and then we applied for some to the Arts Council for a grant project to help us make the project. But and then within that we applied for access money, because part of the project, and I'll hand this over again to you, Kerry or Lou. The project's not just about making a show. The idea is the show will just be the beginning of an advocacy project in which Kerry can now start to explore what this all means. So it's not like, oh great, let's make a show, bye. It's like we parachute in and go.
And the advocacy project is not for provision for disabled artists, of which there are some increasingly more organisations that are providing support, like Unlimited, but it's for advocacy for audiences who have access issues with live theatre or live cultural events, and so we wanted to use this as an opportunity for Kerry. Do you want to talk a bit about it, Kerry?
Yeah, well, I don't exactly know where we are with it, but Jamie made a really great point of something I'm very interested in doing, is making a one-stop place where there is a listing where I can look and I know I'll be able to attend all these shows, whether they're online. Someone with other conditions or other restrictions can look and see where they can go. That's something I'm really interested in, so I'll be hitting you up about that, Jamie. But yeah, I'm approaching this from an audience perspective, and there is a lot of input and there is a lot of support for performers and artists with disabilities. And I just feel as an audience member, the audience are just as important. There's nothing there without an audience. And I just want to support us. Like, I didn't know for 10 years. I didn't go to anything, see anything for 10 years. And now I know it's happening. And I know we've got all you advocates on our side as well and allies. I'm like, oh, it's happening. Okay, let's do it. Let's let people know, because I didn't know until Nigel got in touch with me. So I just got to get it out there as much as possible. And I want to be that in between Nigel and Louise and your side of the world and the rest of the audience, which is my side of the world. It's been for the last, trying to be for the last 10 years.
I think for us as well as artists making the show, because a lot of the work run up to making the show is actually Kerry contacted a lot of people in her online community who we would just come to forums and just talk about the nature of the show we needed to make, just in terms of like, what is the best time to put it on? If people are really, really suffering from chronic fatigue and they've only got so many hours in the day or a certain time, which is why we've got 3 shows, and two are at 2 p.m. and one is at 8 p.m. to just try and be able, just in those simple things which I hadn't considered.
We also considered using Zoom as well, because it's a platform. Well, that we landed on using Zoom because it's a platform that people know more, and we're not throwing brand new technology or platforms at people that they've never used before, which can be terrifying. Because I didn't use Zoom until last year. Nigel and Louise asked me to come on with them. I was like, oh, I don't like video calls, this, that, and the other. And I got on, and I'm more comfortable with it now. But to have that new technology thrown at somebody who's not done it before, used it, we avoided that. And we also considered things like it had to be accessible on phones and tablets as well, which added a whole new gremlin into the Zoom machine, and that was quite an issue quite a few times. But we were all very adamant that it had to work across every machine. People, whatever technology people are using, it had to be viewable on anything. Yeah, and that was very, very important as well.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, all of you. Thanks very much to the whole mystery trip. It was great. I'm really enjoying the way that you're sort of passing the mic back and forward. It's good. Jamie, I wonder if I could come to you, because I know you had some thoughts as well about that kind of resource and that relationship with funding and funders.
I think the big problem that I found in terms of managing funding and funders and applying for work, that you are trying to work with a range of disabled collaborators on is the expectation of knowledge of what people's access requirements will be at the kind of application stage. So when you're applying, you can put in an essentially unlimited personal access costs budget. I tend, for the Arts Council specifically, I tend to upload and justify a spreadsheet with every single cost in order to explain it. But the issue that one fundamentally comes back to is that you can't then go back to the Arts Council and say, this is different. Similarly, when you're putting your project budget together, you might budget a certain amount for making your work accessible, but you might then end up with completely different or unexpected costs, or you might be really committed to that, which then pushes down the available funding for everything else, because that is calculated as part of the overall pot. And I know that Shape Arts recommended that NPOs use 15% of their grant on making work accessible. And I really feel like there should be ways in which those costs are taken out of the main project grant budget and are expected to be met, but slightly separately. That was part of it. Part of it is that you really can think about the things that are stopping you doing your best work as a disabled artist, and whether there are ways that money could support that in making it work. So that's the approach I take to personal access costs. Are there extra barriers that are faced that could be managed with a financial contribution? And I guess, yeah, coming in on the listings website, I think it's a brilliant idea. I think somebody should do it. That somebody is not going to be me, because I'm at capacity. I would love to see it appear at some point, but I have nothing. I cannot contribute to its existence.
I'm in, I'll do it.
That's fantastic. Thanks, everybody. And Richard said in the chat as well, to help facilitate that. That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
Thank you, Richard.
Just a very, very quick point. I feel quite strongly that really access should be included in every project grant for the Arts Council automatically, and that you'd have to opt out of it. And then people haven't got the excuse, and rather than having to ask for it specifically, is like, okay, you should have money to get a Bsl interpreter, and you should have money to have audio description and a Hale typist, and that should just be something. And then, you know, you'd have to actually argue for a case of not having that in your show rather than the other way around. So
yeah, fantastic.
I mean, conceptually, I completely agree. Practically, I don't know if it would work well, just because access costs are so incredibly variable depending on what you're doing, that I think my feeling is that instead 15% of the amount you're applying for should be reserved to only be spendable on access costs. And there should be clarity from the Arts Council about what that means in terms of audience access. But that there should be that bit of flexibility, because some things are going to face far higher costs than others, and that's kind of unavoidable, or far different costs. So I think having a pot of money that you can only spend on access, which is a proportion of your overall application, might be more effective.
yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. Well, look, I'm conscious that we're over time at the moment. So I just wanted to pass the mic briefly to Richard, just to say, Richard, if you had any final thoughts, and crucially as well, the research that you introduced at the beginning of this, for those who want to find out more, kind of when and where is the best place to look for that?
Yeah, I mean, just following on from what both Louise said and what Jamie said, I think there is a kind of a deeper advocacy project here, you know, to actually, you know, work from the bottom up in terms of, you know, our individual practices, but also aim for top down, you know, change around how accessibility is funded. And finally, I'm just going to put in a Twitter handle and a web page for our project. We've got stuff coming out within a couple of weeks the website. So currently it's just a boring holding page, but you can sign up for RSS updates if you want. And we'll start to populate it with case studies. And if it's allowed, we can use the mailing or the attendant list for this event to send out a link to the final report when it comes out in May.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Richard. Well, look, we'll stop there for today. But please remember, we will be back on Thursday between 1 and 3 p.m. UK time, where we'll be joined by some more guests and exploring further some of these themes, looking specifically at approaches to hybridity. So do come along and join us for that. We've also got a link to a short evaluation survey for this session too. You'll be redirected to the form as you leave, or the link will be in the chat. Your feedback is really important to us, and it enables us to keep putting on events like this. But for the time being, I will say a huge thank you to everyone who has spoken today, and to all speakers. Please do pop your own details in the chat as well, where people can find out about your own work, your own practice, and find out more about yourselves as well. If you, again, do have handles for socials or anywhere where people can find you, that would be wonderful to see. I would like to say a huge thank you to both Rachel Jones and Claire Hill, who have done an amazing job today providing BSL and live captions. It's really appreciated. I know that has been a long and lengthy session. So as such, I will stop it there. We'll leave this Zoom open for a moment so that you can copy any links or information from the chat. But apart from that, huge thanks to everyone who has attended today and everyone behind the scenes. And I'll say goodbye. Thank you.